Well, welcome everyone. We're really happy to have you join us today for the CAHRS webcast for 2022. I'm Beth Flynn Ferry, the Executive Director of the Center for Advanced HR Studies, and joining me today are Professors Diane Burton and Tae-Youn Park, who are experts in the area of rewards and compensation. So here's our plan for the next 30 minutes. Diane and Tae-Youn will share some insights that they've had as we've done several working groups, and they do some separate work through the on this topic, and specifically how COVID-19 impacted comp practices. And so throughout the discussion and presentations, we encourage you to share your comments and questions using the Q&A or chat function in Zoom. We'll try to field some of those questions as they come in, and also reserve a few minutes at the end to answer any of those questions. So we're going to get started, and I've got some questions for you, Diane and Tae-Youn. So here's the first one. You did those two working groups on the topics I mentioned. What were the biggest takeaways? Diane?
Yeah, thanks, Beth. So, we were doing these working groups. Institute for Compensation Studies was doing these in partnership with CAHRS, and we're really trying to reach out to the community of experts in total rewards. And we had a sense from talking with colleagues that there was a lot of activity, a lot of things changing, and that was confirmed when we convened the groups and spoke to CAHRS partner companies. What we found particularly interesting was just the creativity that was going into thinking about new kinds of benefits packages. And we saw things that we really haven't seen, a huge emphasis on mental health and well-being and taking advantage of online tools. Things like meditation apps and online therapy. We also saw an interesting emphasis on financial well-being and new kind of services or offerings to help people manage their own finances, learn more about personal financial management. We also saw some creative things around financial wellness. Things like student loan repayments or contributions to 529 packages. So these were ways in which companies were offering new kinds of opportunities, benefits packages to their staff. We saw much more action on the benefits side. And we heard about much more than we did on the compensation side, just in the spring that we've been talking. And it was interesting. We heard from companies that had done a lot on site and they had to quickly pivot to figure out as more and more of their staff were working in remote or hybrid formats during the pandemic, think about how to pivot to make those amenities available in some sort of comparable way. And so that was a place where we saw lots of action and activity, creativity and pivoting from staff at these companies.
Yeah. So, excuse me. I also remember that we also talked about not just the comp and benefit, but also other practices that the companies are thinking about, like adding recognition programs or thinking about how to integrate the career development program as part of the total reward package. So I see that a lot of companies have been doing all of those actions in different departments or different functions. And nowadays they are thinking about holistic approach of like which team will take in charge of developing a total reward experience for employees, and how can we merge all of those experiences together and deliver a comprehensive or holistic approach to employees about what their total rewards package are all about. So it is not only about comp and benefit, but also about all those other kind of activities. But along with Diane's point, I also found that there was a really big theme around personalization or differentiation. So we all know that people have different needs and preferences, and companies are now searching for ways to provide reward programs that are attracting and retaining the talent that they need. For example, in the current economic environment, companies are thinking about what they can do for what they can do for employees in or are traveling to different countries such as Ukraine or Russia and China. They all have different needs to travel to those countries safely or to work in those countries. And then they have to think about ways to, fulfill their needs and preferences that may be different from those people in other parts of the country. And also, it is not only about the geographic country boundaries, but there might be some cultural differences that they have to think about. So, companies are thinking about what is the meaningful way to segment employees into different groups, and then what are the packages that they can deliver to that specific segment of the employees. So that's one way that I see. Also, it is not only about like culture or geographic differences, but age differences can be a big thing too, right? Those people who have been in company for a long time may have different needs than those people who just joined the company right after graduating colleges. And how should they think about their needs different from other groups that have been there for a long time? Are they really different? If they are different, what they can do. Those are another big theme that arose, in our discussion about this total reward package. One more thing that I found interesting is about employee turnover. So people say as employee turnover became more frequent, companies are thinking about ways to offer total reward to retain and attract talent that they need, but it can be a little more selective. For example, when turnover of top performers became higher than the past, maybe average turnover rate increased, but should they be concerned about it or not? Or how many top performers are staying? And what can we do specifically for those top performers than other groups? Do they have different needs? For example, do we need to think more about helping them building friendship at work as after this pandemic, this remote work or flexible work practices become more popular? And are those top performers not really, feeling the bonds that they used to have in the past? And how can companies help them building up like friendship or more collaborative work environments? So, research is fairly clear that as people do more proactive or pro-social actions, they tend to feel more committed to their colleagues, and then they are more committed to their work. If they have relatively fewer opportunities to engage in pro-social activities or in-person interactions, then they may feel less bond and they are more likely to quit. What can organizations do for it? Right? It is not only a matter of saying like retirement fund or giving more pay, but it was more about the experience that companies has to offer to those specific kind of people, right? So I see that, companies are thinking and doing a lot in those space about how to make meaningful segmentation of employees, and then what can we offer to them that are unique to their companies. In doing so, I also saw companies are looking for ways to maintain cost at a reasonable level. So an emerging approach is offering benefit choices within a constant dollar amount. And this has led to the emergence of new kind of HR benefit companies or benefit vendors who enables this kind of choices. So that has been a trend. And I see that in my own research, I see that industry-wise, those HR vendor or benefit vendors are really increasing, has been increasing for the past decades, which means that there is a lot of market demands. So, that is a reasonable way to think about the cost effectiveness side. But at the same time, I see that companies are getting a little bit of pushback from their employees that, if they have to contact the HR vendors to get the benefit, not directly to the companies, they are somewhat confused about the communication that they have to do, how that is combined with other sorts of experiences that the companies are offering too. So, those using third parties makes sense from a cost perspective, but also they have to think about those consistent experience companies wants to offer to employees and whether those vendors are playing that role well for their employees. And if they don't do well, what can they do? For example, I remember one of those, working group company, one company that joined the working group said that they added 3 full-time FTEs just to play the role of benefit navigator to help employees learn about various options the company offers and how they can choose those different options. So rather than just laying out all of those options and say, here are the vendors and they will just take care of all of those, but companies has to communicate that well to the employees why they are offering those options and how they can choose those options for their best interest. And that was a big role. So it is not just the current existing or comp and benefit or HR functions role, but they actually felt the need that they have to add a full-time employees just playing that role, 3 people, physically being in the office, doing all of those communications. Employees. So that was another big thing that I learned, from all of these discussions.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. I some of that was a response to COVID-19, much of it, and do you think it's a different level of innovation than we've seen in the past?
Maybe I can go first. So okay. COVID was a big shock that forced companies to look hard at their on-site benefit offering, especially on-site one, and reconsider what they meant for in a sort of a virtual and remote work world. And things like on-site gym or laundry or cafeteria, food, childcare, all of those things were not really relevant in a remote work environment. I mean, I will put whether that remote work situation will, go forever or whether people will come back, I'll put that note aside. But, those changes anyway made companies to rethink about what they have to do that are different from what they used to offer. So before pandemic, some companies, one thing that I found interesting from the discussion is some companies regarded higher compensation as a substitute for a remote work option. And now they question whether they remain substitute or not. So that's another big theme that came out from the COVID in response to COVID. And companies are searching for ways to identify what work should be done in person, what work can be done remotely, and how can they think about them differently. Another big theme was about whether they need to adjust compensation to match geographic differentials. For example, should the location pay as an explicit line item or not? Right? I see that, almost those working group participants, some said, yes, we do. Others said, no, we don't do. So there are different approaches companies are taking, but that is certainly a big question that they have to think about in response to this COVID-19 situation. One more thing before I give Diane the microphone is that this COVID forced companies to think about those like inflation and tight labor market situation. So, employees have some perceptions about inflation rate is 7% and my merit increase is 3%, why are you doing it? And a company has to find a way to explain or justify, why they are offering it that way, right? And tight labor market situation, you see news articles saying that Walmart increased their minimum wage a lot. Should we do the same? Why aren't you not doing the same, when all of these others are doing? And companies has to do much more research about how prevalent that phenomenon is and whether that's really applicable and relevant to their own company situations, and how can they, tell employees about the approaches they are taking that might be similar or different from other companies are doing shown in the news articles. So those are some of those changes that I heard and you learned from those discussions in the COVID-19 working group.
And let me respond also, because Beth, I think you asked the question, how much of this is really COVID related? And I think there's an interesting punctuation point here. How much of this is COVID related? Because what we learned from COVID is HR was on the front lines, right? The HR function had to mobilize quickly and figure a lot of things out that they never had to deal with before. And CAHRS companies, right, we're proud to say, rose to the occasion and really, and people were exhausted, but they put forward enormous effort. And we really saw the best of the HR function in dealing with challenges that we have never seen before. So it's a, I think we have the function has a lot to be proud of for how responsive and capable we were. And we see that. What's interesting is that we're also seeing the roles expand. Then the roles become much bigger, and that we heard that loud and clear from our Total Rewards colleagues, that their jobs, they got bigger and they required much more coordination across what had basically been functional silos within the broader HR function. And so, this idea of Total Rewards as part of employee experience, we heard one participant in a working group, their job title changed and their experience became part of their job. And so there's an interesting moment where we're seeing the HR work is expanding and it's becoming more interdependent, and there's a much higher need for coordinating. But you also hear there's also much more need to extend out and talk to your clients, your employees, your customer base, talk to vendors, benchmark against the other companies. What are others doing? So this broadening, it's getting bigger internally. It's requiring more active engagement externally. I think we have to acknowledge that the jobs are getting harder. The jobs are getting harder. They're bigger, more complex jobs. And because we were able to pivot, there's an expectation that, of course, you can figure this out. And so whether it's an inflationary environment, whether it's global geopolitical instability, whether it's like whatever, right? Okay, figure it out. And that, I think it's exciting. I think there's an opportunity for a lot of creativity. I also think we also detected some real exhaustion here.
Exactly. To our participant questions for Tae-Youn or Diane, to put those into the Q&A and we can respond to those. But going back to Diane about Total Rewards jobs and how demanding they were and how they're changing, can you talk a little bit more about those changes?
Yeah, for sure. We continue to see a need for real technical expertise in the function, in the Total Rewards function. And that need is accelerating as things are getting more complex. Even, as we talk about this proliferation of benefits, the negotiations with the different kinds of vendors, as we hear about increasingly complex ways of doing salary, just the work of the Total Rewards comp and benefits function, there's real technical expertise there. We're seeing, at least from the companies that we interact with through CAHRS, lots of dependence on the compensation consulting firms. And so lots of engagement and interaction with them. And so there has to be expertise within the function internally, but really an ability to partner externally, because we're seeing really specialized practices from the consulting firms. I heard from several companies at a meeting just a few weeks ago, some excitement about doing a Total Rewards optimization and doing partnering with a consulting firm to do a conjoint analysis to really optimize the benefits offering with this spirit of personalization and customization. And so we're seeing much more synergy and symbiosis with the external consulting firms, but also a recognition that more work has to happen internally. And so this internal work, it's almost taking on a marketing flavor or a marketing feel, and bringing the experience, the Total Rewards into the employee value proposition. And where we saw that most vividly, I hate to make the quip, companies want their employees to eat their own dog food, right? They're selling things like financial well-being packages to the external clients. Okay, well, internal employees better better be at the top of the game and really take advantage of that. And so, Tae-Youn and I observed a kind of segmentation. It was the healthcare related companies that were focusing on mental health and wellness. And it was the financial service companies, the insurance providers and the banks and the investment firms that were focused on financial wellness. And so there was an alignment with the employee value proposition, but also what the customer offering, what the company capability was.
On their brand, right? And they could almost use their employees like a pilot group in some ways to make sure these programs are doing what they should and are efficiently operating and things like that.
When we know this, and this is where IBM has been written in the press, like there have been many articles under Diane Gerson that's how she developed a lot of the products and offerings that IBM put out there, is like, let's use our 300,000 employees to get it right. And we're going to use our own products and services before we give them to you. And I think we're seeing that kind of take up and pattern among the other companies, which is super interesting. I just, as an academic watching it, one of the things we know about compensation and benefits is that there's a real stratification, there's a real segmentation in the world, and there are better employers and worse employers. We're typically talking to the best employers. What I'm curious to see is whether that segmentation now is going to happen, like a sorting, and will all of the thin and fit people be working for the health and wellness companies, and will all the rich, financially savvy people, and don't the healthcare people need financial wellness, and don't the banks need fitness? I don't know. So it makes me a little bit nervous about taking that to the extreme, that too far. But I think it's going to lead to an ever escalating complexity. The best employers are going to continue to have proliferating offerings and an expectation of more. And that, I'm sure, is scary from a cost perspective. Like, how do we rein that in? There's an old idea of cafeteria plans. Like, are we going to see a reinvention of that in some way? And is it going to require changes to tax laws, different kinds of engagements with regulators? Like, this gets pretty complex fast.
Yeah. Tae-Youn, what did you see?
I mean, adding to what Diane said, what I found interesting is, those CAHRS members are generally like large companies that are more resourceful than others. But even among them, some of them said, we are paying 401k below the market. There is no way that we can offer, higher than the market, but we are thinking about how we can offer other things better to compensate those other experiences. So, companies are, even those resourceful companies are thinking about how to balance out those different things. And I'm sure that smaller, less resourceful companies are under much bigger pressure about, how to balance out those different, things about different offerings that they offer to employees. And also related to Diane's point about like HR's functions become bigger or become more strategic, in my view, is that I found it interesting that one of the companies said in the working group said, I'm in the experience group. And at first, like, what is that? And I was wondering about it. And they said they are a total reward experience team working with comp and benefit people. So their role is not remain that small segment, but they are thinking about broader or more strategic role about what they are offering to employees. And that sort of resonated me about the survey that we did, the CAHRS survey back in January. And in that survey, we found that about 82% of the survey participants said that they changed their mechanism to track employee sentiment about what they are getting or about their comp and benefit function, and this led to changes in their communication strategy. So a lot of changes and discussions are happening in this communication part, which is certainly related to this employee value proposition or employer branding. What are their companies about? How can they reinforce employees' experiences in that regard? using all of these different, total reward functions. So I guess I'm sort of repeating what Diane said, but that's also what I learned from these working group discussions.
Yeah, great. Thank you. To the participants, just want to encourage you, we have, 4 minutes left. If you have any questions you'd specifically like Diane or Tae-Youn to weigh in on, please do type those in the Q&A function. And I, just to mention one other thing that I know didn't necessarily come up in the working group, New York State right now, is this whole idea of pay transparency. And I think we'll do some work on that in the spring. But Diane, you want to talk just a minute about that?
Yes, for sure. And we actually did an event. So we did an event, the Cornell ILR School did an event in advance of the New York City implementation of the pay transparency law, where we brought in experts from the legal side. We had one of the authors of the bill from the Mayor's Equity Commission. And then we had a compensation consultant thinking about pay transparency, and it's the Wild West at the moment, but there is clearly an expectation that this is just going to accelerate. More and more transparency is going to be expected, and we're gathering insights and lessons learned about how companies are approaching it and what are the takeaways. I think one of the early headlines is very similar to what we've been saying all along. The communication matters. So it's not like managers have to be prepared to have uncomfortable conversations. Companies have to have their ducks in the row. They have to have their salary structures sensible and justifiable and explainable, because once it gets out there, right, you have to be prepared to talk about it. And of course, that's the spirit of the legislation. The world will be more fair. Employees will have better bargaining power. The communication, it will be transparency equals fairness. And ultimately, it will close some of the pay gaps, the racial pay gaps, the gender pay gaps. That's the spirit of it.
Yeah.
That more to be discussed on that one. I think that has to be that one has to be one of our next.
And Max just put two that are directly related to those. And Max, I'd encourage you to look out for some spring events that we'll do on that topic. But with that, I'm just going to wrap it up. I want to thank everybody for attending today. I thank Diane and Tae-Youn for their thoughts and sharing. We will have a copy of this webcast posted to the website. So if you'd like to share that more broadly in your organization, you can feel free to do that. And we have a couple more events through CAHRS for the end of the year. One is a working group focused on talent topics. We also have a webcast on HR capability building, and our fall partner meeting on December 15th on the topic of leading HR in a changing world. Go to CAHRS, CAHRScast.cornell.edu to check out any of the details on those events and register for something or share those with your team. So thanks so much for coming today. Have a wonderful day.